Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome aboard the M46 pattern. The video, I guess, is called A Hot Gift from Gaijin, and the M46 is, well, a very special tank when you look at the history of American tanks in particular, not in War Thunder respectively, not in real life, because I do not know too much about this tank in real life. However, it's very close in its overall performance to the M26 pattern, or Pershing, sorry about this, which I used to love in arcade. I was so good in this tank because it was like a T-34-85 with gun depression. That's all I needed for my flank and spank playstyle. And people always said, yeah, this tank is bad, yada yada yada, but it performed really well. And I, still to this day, have a 6-to-1 kill to death ratio in the M26 in arcade. Going back to realistic, to the M46, why do I show you this particular game and this tank overall? First of all, the short-barreled 90mm guns from the Americans that could fire heat FS with 210mm of penetration got a buff. So also the STA-1 and the STA-2 from the Japanese tech tree. And the old shell got replaced with the M348, or the shell was buffed to have now 305mm of penetration, which is a huge significance. So the major damage dealing shell is still the APHE, but for frontline engagements, for tricky shots at armor, especially IS-6, this tank now has the necessary weapon to switch between an APHE shell for side shots or weakly armored targets to one-shot them, to really silence them quickly, like in my Super Hellcat review where I mentioned this quite often, and also a heat FS shell, something that the Super Hellcat doesn't have. So I'm going into the CC first and just go around the corner quickly. This tank has no stabilizer, so I have to drive slowly, and I think the first automatic gear, so to speak, don't know how you call it properly, is very good for that. Now the gameplay that you see in the background will be a nice one, but it will be not exceptional except for a few parts. The reason why I showed you the M46 is because I used to love the M26, but I was not really sure what the M46 was about. The heat shell was just not the selling point. Now it is. I mean, you could do this with the previous shell as well, but with this one you could even take the front of a King Tiger. And that's the topic of today's video actually. And yes, I heard a tank around the corner, so I'm playing chasey catchy with a... what is it? Oh, it's a Panther. Yeah, and now I also can easily, very reliable, punch through the front of a Panther at any distance, nearly everywhere except the gun mantle. I think there's a Panther F. I just didn't have quite the reload here to smack him, but you could see the drawback of the heat shell. If you don't quite 100% hit an ammo rack, it just goes orange or yellow and doesn't blow up. APHE is still the major damage dealing, and the M82 APHE shell is a fantastic shell. Now we can see the drawbacks in this engagement. The Panther seems to drop the smoke shell, and yeah, we're going in blind mode. He thought I would go around him. I punch through his frontal plate with the heat shell. Now I switch to APHE shell, and that in this engagement will not come off best. However, overall, a tank that can switch between heat FS and APHE has a significant advantage over a tank that just fires APHE or just fires heat FS. Now that always depends also on the reload, and now we're going into the phase where we hunt down German AAA. One quick word about German AAA: they have some fantastic ones, but the real good ones like the Coelian and for a bit more frontline engagement, and the Kugelblitz, which needs really no introduction at this point in time, they are at 7.0, so they were drawn away from 6.7, and that also is a final nail into the German 6.7. So you could discuss all you want about the German 6.7, what you want, but they went from one of the strongest faction in the game to by far the weakest when it comes to spawn points, when it comes to air support, when it comes to overall performance, and also the comparison to other nations. It's quite significant how Germany went down. And American tanks had, like the British, always big trouble when it came to the introduction of the tech tree and the first tiers. They were not that convincing. They were just, yeah, always taken down by the Germans in a head-on engagement. Those days are long gone. First with the introduction of the Hellcats for the Americans, then also the buff to the APDS for the British, then the stabilizers, of which the Germans have none up until to 8.0 with the Leopard A1A1, which I think is the only one. And the only tank that justifies the existence of German 6.7 is the RE251, which is a premium tank, so not accessible for your casual non-premium player, of which the player base consists to quite a bit, you know, I'd say. I dare to say. And now, the one tank that really had not a real place for the Germans actually got a buff. Now this buff is highly necessary when fighting Russians, T-44s, T-54s, and you now can punch through the frontal plate. In fact, that shell just has 15mm less than the Pattern 2 and the Pattern 3 with their respective heat-defense shell. Now I have to say one word, and that is that the stock grind on this tank is not very nice. It's actually pretty awful. You have to get through the APHE and then 2 APCR, and the 2 APCR are just useless. They are literally useless. I mean, technically, theoretically, they are useful. High muzzle velocity, good performance against flight armor, but you know, you meet not a lot of Russian tanks that actually have flight armor on big parts. One thing that I have to mention also compared to the STA2 is the zoom. This is your normal, good all-around zoom, and the STA2 has a very good magnification, which means that in overall performance it's actually pretty bad. So here the AAA actually took out my 90mm gun by shooting at it with armor piercing, and that's a drawback of the tank, that it has a muzzle brake when it comes to damaging the gun. So I think I never mentioned this before, but every tank with a muzzle brake has a problem in this respect, because it's much easier to hit and to damage than your normal gun without a muzzle brake. So I think the nation that now lacks competitiveness at overall performance are the Germans. What are ways to buff the Germans? Well, the flight models must get fixed in the way that the instructor doesn't interfere. They might be the most realistic flight models, but the instructor, the translation between your mouse movement into the actual rudder and elevator movement is not very nice. So here I actually hit a Focke-Wulf, what seems like, with my 50 cals, but it was not quite good enough. So yeah, now there are, most enemies are just in airplanes, and the Focke-Wulf went into a head-on against the P47, and the P47 was destroyed. Now that seems stupid, but the actual 50 cal buff, you know, there are more stupid decisions these days than going head-on with 50 cals. So, the fence around the turret, if you wonder, is an upgrade. It's add-on armor. It's not that useful, but it looks strange. Bit of a hipster tank. And the intended role was for, you know, bazookas or, you know, not so good heat-defense shells to detonate prematurely and then lose penetration with distance to protect the turret. Now, I think this is something debatable, but it is definitely unique. So I have loaded a heat-defense shell and I fire at the Focke-Wulf, hit him but not significantly, and then he comes head-on and the heat-defense shell does the job. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and that was my 6th kill. So, what do I think about the buff? Well, it buffed a tank that previously had no selling point. That's important because now the actual M46 Tiger has now again a useful place thanks to the Heat FS shell. So the premium version is now, or is as good as the Tech 3 version, which was it also previously, but again it also received a buff to the Heat FS shell. Talking about the buff to the Heat FS shell, I saw the Hellcat reversing, and when a Hellcat reverses there's always an enemy. I switch then to APHE for the next shot, come around as I see that he doesn't see me, aim for the gun breach and damage it. And now the King Tiger is dead. He just hasn't died yet, but he's already dead. So the Hellcat flanks him, I try to flank him, Hellcat takes the left side, I take the right side, he has to angle, he decides to angle against me, and the Hellcat takes him out, and I got my assist ace. And we actually got here rocketed by the F8 F1. Hey, you know, that's friendly fire, but there is nothing friendly about it, so yeah. And then, oh, that's a Jagdpanther. I tried to reverse, but he shoots through the trail and one-shots me right through the front, which is not the worst armor in the game, but it's not good enough at its BR. So don't rely on the hull armor. And that's actually the end of the game. So lately I have a few cases where I die right at the end of the game. Yeah, but the gameplay overall I think was nice, and the discussion, I think I managed to talk about everything that I wanted. Let's have a quick look at the post-battle results. 4,144 research points and 5,500 silver lions. A lot of awards and a good chunk of the research progress of the M313 smoke shell taken out. So yeah, that's quite something. Nice gameplay. I like this tank. Maybe I will make a tank review about it, as there are some very interesting stats about it. So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.